Hunter Biden's pardoned. What about those thrown in jail from January 6th? That's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt, and I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. Oh, so many January 6ers are still rotting behind bars at federal penitentiaries in D.C., in other parts, some on home arrest. 5, sadly, have committed suicide. Did you know that? Probably not. Well, my guest today has so much important stuff to talk about that the entire show is my interview with him. He is Ed Martin. He is a legal mind, a legal scholar, an attorney. He is also president of Eagle Forum Education and Legal Defense Fund. He has written a New York Times best-selling book, The Conservative Case for Trump, and he is part of the Trump transition team as we speak. So he has a lot to say about the January 6th victims / imprisoned, because he has been on their legal side since day one. And so he's going to talk pretty much the entire show about what's going on there and compare and contrast that to the Merry Christmas, Happy New Year gift Joe Biden just gave to Hunter by way of a pardon that doesn't just pardon his crimes, his known crimes, his jury convicted crimes, his acknowledged crimes and crimes that he admitted to, but also whatever else might pop up during that 10-year period that he committed those crimes. He gave him a blank slate excuse pardon for all those years. Wow, must be nice. Must be nice to be a family member of the corrupt Joe Biden. Before I get into all of that, I want to quickly mention, if you like Bold and Blunt, you may get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, at Real Life Network, at washingtontimes.com, where you may also subscribe to my Bold and Blunt newsletter. Just go to washingtontimes.com, scroll to the bottom of the page, find the newsletter section, click on it, and find my newsletter. Sign up with your email address, and Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, right to your email box, you will get delivered Bold and Blunt. And in it contains all my commentaries that I write at the Washington Times all day long, all week long, all month long, all year long. You get them all, as well as my twice weekly Tuesday and Thursday Bold and Blunt podcasts, along with whatever video Bold and Blunt podcasts or versions of Bold and Blunt by video I do during the week. You don't want to miss it. And if you already are a subscriber, thank you. I really do appreciate your support, and so does the Washington Times. But you can also get Bold and Blunt wherever podcasts are available. Without further ado, let me introduce my guest, Ed Martin. It is so great to have you back on Bold and Blunt. Always great to chat with you.
Well, thank you, Cheryl. I always enjoy talking with you, whether we're talking on your program or you and I offline. I enjoy it, and I get energized by the voice that you have in the media and in the community. So it's always good to talk.
Well, it's ditto on that. Back at you, Ed. So I want to talk about your work on J6 and so forth, the January 6 victims, and get your intake on Hunter's pardon. But first, talk a little bit about, I know you are newly appointed to the Trump transition team. Talk a little bit about what you're doing there.
You know, it's funny, Cheryl. Obviously, the election, everybody rushes to the election day, and at least for conservatives, we have election day. We don't have to keep counting in places, but anyway. And so, but I'm a little superstitious, an old campaign guy, and so I had a hard time when people said, "Oh yeah, we're starting to work on transition." So we had to get to the election, and afterwards, I said to some of the folks that I knew from the previous administration and the campaign, if there's a way that I can help with helping identify people that want to work in the administration, if there's policy issues, I'd be happy to do it. And so they took me up on it. So, some of what I've been doing actually is what we're going to talk about is giving as much intelligence and context for the January 6th defendants as I can. I do have a lot of that. It's also been thinking creatively about some of the other aspects of what has to happen very quickly. The day one of an administration, even though it's kind of wonderful that it's he's already been there, so he has a sense of what he wants to do. But there's a lot to do. So it's kind of TBD, and I think everybody is saying, okay, we've got a month, a little bit less or more than a month soon. We got work to do, and Christmas will be in there. So I'll do whatever I can to help make things successful for this president.
So can you weigh in, or do you feel comfortable weighing in on his picks so far, his nominations?
Yeah, you bet.
All right,
you bet.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, look, I think it's been. Well, so I worked very closely with Phyllis Schlafly for years, late Phyllis Schlafly, and she and I talked about transitions. In 1980, she was instrumental in Ronald Reagan's finally winning. He had run in '76. He'd actually dipped his toe in a couple other times, and so she was a big force in that. And then there was infighting in the White House. The conservatives wanted this, and the moderates wanted that. The Bushies versus the Reagans, however you want. And she talked about there's always these sort of tensions in the movement happened under Nixon, and so she wrote about that a lot. And so ultimately, when it comes to picks, those are the presidents, right? And I think he's honored some of his pledges. I think Bobby Kennedy did make a big difference in the campaign. He made a lot of Catholic voters look up and say, Kamala Harris and antagonism to Catholics, and here's Bobby Kennedy and this Trump guy, so and he honored that, and he put the guy in, and he's one thing you can say about Trump is he's confident enough to do what he wants no matter what. So I'm encouraged. Look, I think Tulsi Gabbard is a very impressive person, and I don't know if I agree with all of her politics, but she's a big league ball player. She's a high level player. I mean, you have to respect that. And then down through, John Ratliff is very experienced. I think Pete Hegseth is. I think it's kind of wonderful. My brother's a military man, and I think it's wonderful the military guys relate to him and sort of his bluntness on positions. I joke with somebody today in a conversation. I don't think he'll get in trouble for having had challenging life in terms of fidelity in marriage. That especially when you have senators across the
That's so polite.
Senators across the table have to ask questions, and you want to be like, let's start with you, Senator. So I'm not advocating for any of this. I think they're all need to do better. But I think that Hegseth is actually going to probably pay a price for his comments on women in military and women in combat, which I completely applaud in the sense that Phyllis Schlafly used to talk about that all the time. It's what BDRA in many ways. And, he's been very blunt as a military guy in combat. He's like, he has an opinion. So, but I think, I don't know yet on, say, Treasury. I don't know what that means. That's not my area of expertise in terms of how successful or not. But in general, I think they're pretty good. Matt Gaetz, when he was appointed, I was excited because back to January 6th, we were headed there. He was fearless. He's been fearless on J6. He's been fearless in what he believes, and that's uncommon. And so I was kind of excited about that. I did think it was a surprise because the Klieg lights are bright, and I think that was in some ways that was all too fleeting. But Pam Bondi, look, anyone who complains about Pam Bondi, she was elected Attorney General of the state. She was a local prosecutor. I mean, this is, again, it's a big league ball player. Now, I think she's got a public life. There's a few policy questions people have, but that'll come out. So, in general, I think it's exciting and energizing, and I don't think you get all of them, right? I think you lose a couple somewhere, maybe, but maybe it's only Matt Gaetz, and it'll all be good.
Shed some light for me, and for listeners, if you could, on what do you think of Kristi Noem as Homeland Security chief?
Yeah.
Because I would, she's phenomenal, right? Big fan of hers. I know she's a big Trump supporter. She did great with the COVID thing and leading as governor. But I would have put her like with Interior or something like that. Why Homeland Security?
That's a good question. As you know, then, if you know her, and I remember I went to visit her with a woman named Kitty Worthman. Kitty Worthman passed away in the last few years. She was, I think, in her mid-90s, and she had fled from Austria. When she was a little girl, Kitty Worthman sat in the front row. She was very small for her age, and she sat in the front row when Hitler came and spoke to her class. No kidding. And she would tell these stories. And she came to America, married, had a family, and she lived in South Dakota. and she was a dominant conservative force, grassroots-wise, in North and South Dakota, but in particular in South Dakota. But so we went to see Kristi Noem when she was in Congress, and I met her. And she's unbelievable. You know, this is like, she's just incredibly charismatic. Like, she's a beautiful woman, that's fair. But there's also a way some of these people, they're just incredible charisma and makes you feel like you're important. It's a real gift. I think it's partly, I think she is well adjusted. And sometimes people fake it. Like Bill Clinton used to say, once you can fake sincerity, you got it made. So, but I think Kristi Noem is very impressive. And as you said, she can succeed at anything she's done, and she has. So, here's the one wrinkle on that, I would say. And I like her too. But nobody's running immigration policy in the country except, Donald Trump with Stephen Miller, right? Mm-hmm. If you know the administration. So in some ways, and now Homan, right? So she's got other things to do. It's a big logistical. I think it's a big job that gives her a longer arc of her career to be, I think a presidential timber or vice presidential timber. But I agree with you. It's not a natural fit. It's almost like, hey, you're talented. We know it. Go do this. But in terms of policy, some of the conservatives are worried that she's been a little less hardline on immigration. I don't think it matters. I don't think it's a particular factor. And so again, talent. There's that old book that Jim Collins, the expert on management, wrote, Good to Great. And one of the chapters is get the right people on the bus. And if they're not in the right seat, you can move their seats, but you got to get the best talent. She's a talent. Right. So get her on the bus and, see if it turns out that she's bored or it's not a great fit, she's still got a great future for the country.
Yeah, I think it has something to do with her future that, in her state, through no fault of her own, just the geographical location of her state, national security, immigration isn't front and center. So you get her on board on the bus, like you say, and put her in a position where that flushes out her resume and positions her for further political, positions.
Success,
So let's jump to Hunter Biden, the pardon, and in contrast, the wasting away in federal prisons, the J6 people. So talk a little bit about this.
Well, I have such strong feelings on it. You and I have talked in the past. For years now, I've represented some of the people who are. I'm a lawyer, and I'm in the bar in D.C. So I represented some of the J6 prisoners. I've also been on the board of the Patriot Freedom Project, and we've done raised a ton of money and helped the families and helped lawyers. So I care a lot about it. I've been very close to it, and the best news about the Hunter Biden pardon is. By the way, I do want to say this. I do like when Joe Biden talks about his son. As a father, like, there is something primal that we have to be willing to celebrate. Like, and I think the thing about Joe Biden is he lied all the time. And I wouldn't have been able to lie. If you told me my son was going to go to prison in the last 18 months and you said, are you going to pardon him? I'd say, I'm going to look at it. I wouldn't have been that good a liar because I don't think it was ever. So that's one thing to acknowledge. But, in the document, Biden uses, so this is really something I've cared about and I've been talking about for about 2 months now. So ever since the election, I guess it's less than 2 months, but it feels like 2 months. But the pardon statement, the statement that accompanies a pardon has a long tradition. It goes all the way back to James Monroe in particular, who used it sort of famously in a couple of about people who had deserted and he was forgiving them. And it's always been used, the pardon statement. So Joe Biden, in fact, you'll remember, Cheryl, I'm sure, Caspar Weinberger was pardoned. And when he was pardoned, there was a pardon statement that George H.W. Bush issued that sort of explained why he did it and sort of framed the end of Iran-Contra and why he thought it should end. And so Joe Biden's pardon statement on his son, this extraordinary plenary pardon, which is another question, and I have an opinion on that too. But I'm more interested in he said, quote, I have watched my son being selectively and unfairly prosecuted, end quote. Then later he says, quote, I believe in the justice system, but as I have wrestled with this, I also believe raw politics has infected the process and it led to a miscarriage of justice, end quote. Now, those lines in this pardon statement of Joe Biden about Hunter are now the framework for Donald Trump to say, I totally agree. We totally agree that there's been selective charging, there's been selective use of prosecution. The justice system, which we all believe in, has been corrupted. and we have to fix this. And I think it's a huge relief to us in the movement, conservative movement, J6. By the way, Cheryl, there's 27 or 28 this stupid unconstitutional FACE Act that was used to put pro-life grandmas in prison. I think there's 9 people in prison, but there's 27 or 8 that have been convicted. They're carrying felonies and carrying burdens. They should all be pardoned in the same context of using, when after October 7th, when they disrupted Jewish services in synagogues, that's a violation prima facie of the FACE Act. In order to pass the FACE Act and try to pass constitutionality, it was totally passed to say you can't protest in front of abortion clinics, and if you do, we're going to arrest you for that and charge you with a felony. And that was what they added to the definition, or a clinic or religious services. Well, you know who wasn't charged? The Hamas supporters who disrupted synagogue services were not charged under the FACE Act. Why? Because, as Joe Biden said, selective prosecution. And so my point is, it's Joe Biden's pardon of his son. I care less about Hunter Biden in the sense that, a father will do what a father does. I care more about the country. And now Joe Biden agreeing that the justice system has been corrupted, and therefore let's do something about it. And I think it's a huge opening for us to articulate what's really important about this moment, because the crown jewel of America is our Constitution and the rule of law and the values underlying that. The values are Judeo-Christian, if you want to be generous. The truth is they're Christian. We all say Judeo-Christian because Christianity is Judaic in its roots, but it's a Christian country, the values. So the values of honor and seriousness and honesty, that's what underlies the Constitution and the rule of law. That's what's gutted when we have this weaponized Department of Justice. So I think it's really exciting, and I think that the president, I know because I've been contributing to the thought process, that the president, President Trump, if he does pardon many people, he will be utilizing the pardon statement to define the framework and redefine the lying narrative about what's gone on in this country. And I think that will be a huge it would be a huge step forward for our country.
So do you see any adverse impacts, though, from using the pardon of Hunter Biden for the conservative side to pardon those who never should have been imprisoned or falsely indicted anyhow, in terms of degrading the rule of law going forward, right? You get into this, well, you did it, so now we're going to do it, and then they do it, and then we do it again. Do you see that happening at all?
Well, I think there's always a risk of that. Like, there's always a risk of the abuse. But I also think that the founders, again, in their what I would call divinely inspired wisdom, had this power in there that is yes, it can be abused, but it's also a balancer, and so that you can protect the system. In other words, the system doesn't just crash because you have this release valve. It's almost like a pressure valve. So I think abuse is always a possibility. Look, I mean, what Joe Biden did in terms of his son, pardoning him all the way back to 11 years ago to 2014, it just screams of a cover-up. It screams of why all the way back there. And, I think that there will be some, I'm one of them, that will say, okay, you now have immunity. Great. Now come on down. There's no Fifth Amendment objection to discussing. The Fifth Amendment says I don't have to speak if I incriminate myself. Well, you can't be incriminated because you're clear. So answer these questions. And I do want to get to the bottom of it. I do think we should. So I think I think these good things can always be abused. That's what we are because we're sinful people and broken and fallen. But I like the protection, and I think, in the context of what's gone on for the last 25 years, it's mostly regular people, not just conservatives. It's mostly regular. Cheryl, you let me talk on this a lot. The January 6th defendants, there are 368 still in jail right now. There are 1,560 total in the database. We created a database of everyone charged, everyone that pled, everyone that was convicted. So it's over 1,500, and there's 368, I think that's the number, in jail currently. Okay, so that's a lot of people that should get out. But the fact is that whole system was used against them in a way that we've never really seen. Meaning the justice system was used to charge them with things that weren't real. I have he's not a client, but I have a close friend now who spent 3+ years in jail. And he was charged with 3 misdemeanors and 1 felony, the 1512 charge. Okay, so they used the 1512, it's a felony. They said he's a felon. He's getting risky.
Is that Steve Stockman? Is that Steve?
No, that's not. Stockman's another example, actually.
I just interviewed him, so yeah.
No, this is one of the J6ers.
Okay.
And his name is Tim Hale. And Tim is held, right, on a felony all that time. Then the Supreme Court throws out the felony, and now he's only charged with, and he's convicted of 3 misdemeanors. Well, 3 misdemeanors, you should have been in jail for about an hour, and then go home and come back to plead, to fight for those. He spent 3.5 years in jail, and he's the kid that they took his cell phone, either the FBI or the prosecutor took his cell phone, and they looked at his cell phone and they found that during COVID, he's kind of a character. He's a funny dude. He's a history buff. He's an Army veteran. He's a Navy civilian worker, right? So he's not, no priors, no violence, nothing. But during COVID, he was being stupid, and they put his a mustache like Hitler, and they put this out. They took from his phone the photo, and they leaked it. And they leaked it to say, look at the J6ers. These are nasty. These are Nazis. And it was a total lie. He's half Puerto Rican, and his mother's family is Jewish. And they slurred him in order to push the narrative. For what reason? And the only reason was a political advantage. So what happened with J6, January 6th, was so abusive that it's why we have to have, I think, a plenary pardon power that you can utilize to rebalance the system in this case. And if it's very unpopular, if somebody does something so unpopular, they'll lose the next election, right? They will pay a price. Many think Gerald Ford lost the election because pardoning Nixon was unpopular the way he did it. So I think there's a political answer to.
So I really wanted to get into a little bit more detail about J6 with you because you're an excellent source on that. Do you have a few minutes? I know that we've already hit on. Okay. So insofar as the fate of those still imprisoned based on January 6 activities, what do you see this administration doing?
Well, I know nothing. I have no inside knowledge, even though I'm helping with the transition on exactly what's going to happen. I have been a resource and an advocate for what I think should be, significant pardons and commutations. And, of course, there's various levels of what could happen. One thing is you could commute the sentence of anybody who's sitting in jail and say, just go home. At least you get to go home, and you could later revisit the question of whether there should be a full pardon, right? A full pardon gets you, if whatever you're convicted of, and if you have a probation or even a fine owed, you lose your right to vote, if it's a felony. So a pardon will clear all that up. So, I think that there's some people are advocating, and I go back and forth a little bit, that some of the rotten eggs that were there at the some of the rotten apples that were at January 6th that maybe have priors and were, if you have an event and there's 500,000 people, trust me, you're going to get more than a few really unsavory characters. I mean, who can afford take time off of work and maybe don't have. So there are some real bad apples in a way, but they weren't insurrectionists, and they're caught up in this. So. I think the president has made a commitment to do the right things, and I think he's going to make a judgment about that. I have some clients over the course of this where they're all holding on to a Trump sign, and they're pulling on the Trump sign, pushing and pulling on a Trump sign, and there's 40 people holding on the Trump sign, one of these huge signs, and a cop comes over and he grabs the sign, and the pulling and pushing pushes against him, and he gets knocked down. And everybody holding the sign gets charged the way the law is, with the battery, with hit, and so that's an example of something you're like, well, is that really, when you burned cars at the Trump inauguration in 2017, and then you later got the charges dismissed, and some of those people got paid for their incarceration, they got payments out of the so you just say to yourself, again, selective prosecution, selective enforcement. So I'm optimistic that the president is going to be sweeping. I don't know if it'll be blanket, but I think he's going to be sweeping in terms of how unfair it was. Oh, and this is what I want to say, Cheryl. I'm sorry, my mind went a little further. I wanted to tell you this, that if you're rich, if you're middle class and up, you got out of jail. I could go into it with you, and you would know the names if I told you. Some famous people, rich people. There's a billionaire whose son got arrested. They are out of jail. They're home. They're home, and they may be fighting for their, they have a case or whatever. But who's stuck in jail is working people. It's stunning to see. And my point on this, the J6 is, it's not conservatives. It's not even MAGA. It's regular people too often in the last 25 years are targeted by this government and weaponized against. The Tea Party people, many of those people were new to the movement, and they're targeted by the IRS, right? I mean, you go down the list and you say, who's paying a price? It really is kind of we the people. It's not the elites. Dean Eastman and Jeff Clark, they're elite lawyers. They did get targeted. So I'm not saying that there's none. But I'm saying that in terms of J6, if you go to that jail, if you go to of the 368, I think that's the number, that are in jail today, they're all working class. They're all military. A lot of them are military enlisted, right? They're not officer candidate school. They're the heart and soul of what we would think of as America. And they are just getting kicked to the curb. And I've dealt with their family. I've dealt with the kids. It's just brutal. As you know, the inflation is bad for everybody, even those of us that are, blessed and have a lot and enough. But for working people, I tell people, they're like, someone asked me about a J6, and I said, is he missing mortgage payments? And I said, you misunderstand. These people have rent. They don't have mortgages. These are working class. They don't have car payments. They have a carburetor that's gone bad, right? They don't have private school tuition. They have a co-payment on their health care for their kid who's out sick with the flu, and that's what they're fighting to pay. So it's I think that part of it is, and I'll be more controversial, Cheryl. I think the people that particularly were put in jail and put through the ringer in this January 6th, a lot of them they're owed money. I think they're owed money. I think any kid of the J6 folks should be on a scholarship to college. They should pay nothing for college if they can get to college. I mean, a lot of them don't. So I'm being a little bit even silly because a lot of them are, but you got to do something. This was brutally unfair to the people that are tied to J6. 99% of them. There might be 1% that deserve a little bit of hassle for but even that I wouldn't hold against them.
Just finish with this because it's heartbreaking listening to you give the realities of those who are in jail, just wasting away in jail, their families torn apart. If I ask you to pick, somebody that or that you know their family of, who have been thrown in jail because of January 6th, that is a really heartbreaking case, what comes to mind?
Well, I do a couple of categories. A couple of categories are some young people that came and they were I don't know, do-gooders is the wrong word, but they were excited about their country, and they like I mentioned Tim Hale, this guy named Will Pope who's from Kansas. He was doing his PhD at the time, and he came with his brother, and they both got swept up in this, and no violence, no nothing, going through the Capitol. And those folks, those individuals went through a kind of torture and hell, and that's one group, and that's real. But like Will is a young man. He's probably in his 20s, and he's tough and he's smart. He's one of the best pro se lawyers. He represents himself I've ever seen. He's just amazing. He's uncovered all sorts of stuff, Cheryl. It'll make you laugh until you cry when you realize how insane it is. He's got all this that he's uncovered and forced the DOJ to react. But the other category that I'm thinking of is a couple of my immediate clients who had a wife and have a wife and a couple of kids. In one case, 4 kids. And they're going through this period, and they're young kids, where their dad's gone. And I think it's 3 boys, the one I'm thinking of. And, one of the boys is, now like 14 to 18 is the time his dad's gone, right? And the other one is like, 12 to 16 years old. It just is, it turns you upside down in a way that only people who've gone through major loss in their lives, they lose a mom or dad when they're in their young. I mean, we can all get through it. But it's very, very tough, and those people are experiencing a level of suffering. And then those individuals, when you go visit the guys in jail, it's like devastating. I have a new. I'm gonna sound like a liberal, Cheryl. I have this new found love for. I mean, I should have been a better Christian for those that are in jail. But also that the system is mistreating people. It's not justice when it's not just J6 in other contexts. It's not. And the imbalance of power, Cheryl, is that the prosecutors in America, like if you were a federal prosecutor in 1975, I think you and I would go back in time and meet one of those guys or gals. We'd be like, wow, totally impressive. It's like FBI. In the old days, my neighbor was an FBI agent growing up, and he was the best. And now you look at it and you say, you guys have your thumb on the scale, and you may still be the best schools, you may be the best training, but the thumb is on the scale where you're just picking winners and losers in life. And so that category of those folks that have family impacted and kids especially, it'll break your heart. And I'll finish with this one story. In the last summer, we went to Bedminster. We did the Patriot Freedom Project, which is a great organization. I'm on the board. If you go to patriotfreedomproject.com, it's just a great group, and we helped lots of the kids and families and all sorts of stuff. It's been amazing to be a part of. But we went to Bedminster and had a fundraising event, and President Trump showed up, as he did every time. We had, I think, 3 events over the last 3 years. He always came. And so he showed up, and I was doing the MC. And I said to him, sir, over there, that table right there is just all those are kids of guys that are in jail. He said, really? And I said, yeah. And he said, bring them up here. And so we brought a little stage, and they brought him up there. And they're just totally blown away, right? It's the President of the United States, Donald Trump and all. And I can picture the 3 kids I was talking about, 3 boys. And President Trump said to them, I get goosebumps thinking about it. He said to him, how you doing? He's talking. And he looks at him, he says, to about 10 kids, all listening, hanging on every word. And he said, your lives are going to be great. Don't worry. Your lives are going to be great. It's going to be great. You're going to have great lives. Now, you and I show, what does he know? Except if you hear that from Donald Trump when you're a 12-year-old kid, you think, okay, I'm going to make it great. And that kind of, I want someday to do an interview. I want to interview an applicant for a job, and I want to notice that somehow his dad was in January 6th, and I want to say, wow, your dad went through a lot. I want you to work here, or I want to give you an opportunity. And I think that the country is going to celebrate 250 years. We did lots of stuff that was confusing to people, and at a certain point they thought bad things, and they came to realize it was good things, rebellions and all. I want to look back on January 6th, know the truth, and I want to honor the people that had to suffer. And I do want to hold accountable the people that did this to them. I want to know who in the Department of Justice decided to charge, for example, the 1512, a totally incorrect charge, felony that was used to bludgeon and beat up these people and put them in jail. There's someone that should be responsible. And I don't want to have someone tell me the history in 15 years of who did it. I want to know next year who did it, and I want them to be held accountable in some meaningful way, if only shamed. If it's not illegal, they should be shamed. So anyway,
it's impossible. That's fine. We've got like a minute left. It's impossible to listen to you without being drawn into the desire to help these people who are in jail and their families now. Is there any sort of charitable endeavor that's been established?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yep. patriotfreedomproject.com. If you go there, I'm on the board. I can tell you we used money just to help. Early on, we used the money to help some lawyers to represent our guys. We help pay for lawyers, but mostly it's for the families. And by the way, the FBI is showing up at people's houses every week still. They're still doing this. They're going to do it right till the end. And so there's people they're calling and saying, can you help us? Can you help us? So patriotfreedomproject.com, very, very stingy and ruthless at spending the money correctly and very quiet. And I'll tell you, that group, Cynthia Hughes is the founder, we have for 18 months been developing what I would call the definitive database. We don't do tweets about it. We don't brag about it. The definitive database of in preparation for pardons and for the future, so that people can go and see the 1,580 defendants and others and find a way to help them going forward. And that's not public. We haven't published that yet because we're trying to work with the powers that be to make sure we get as many pardons as can happen. But at a certain point, we want to brag. These are the men and women that went through this. 5 people, I'm sorry, Cheryl, I know you're running out of time. 5 people killed themselves. 5 people killed themselves because of being threatened with charges or charged. 5 people. Now, suicide is a mental health thing. I don't blame anyone else for suicide. But I can tell you some of the treatment by some of these prosecutors, they deserve a real examination of their conscience for what they did. I mean, really nasty stuff. So anyway, patriotfreedomproject.com is a place that they can help, and we'd love any support people can give us.
I am checking it out today. Ed Martin, I want to thank you so much for your work, for your time today, and you know what? God bless going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Patriot Freedom Project. That's the website. Go there, check it out. And they have pictures of those J6ers who are still imprisoned, along with the addresses where maybe you can drop them a line. Maybe you can send them a quick Christmas card to let them know they're not forgotten, and that you are out here praying for the welfare of their families as well as the welfare of themselves. So, patriotfreedomproject.com. I want to thank you for listening. Remind you, if you like Bold and Blunt, you may get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, at Real Life Network, at WashingtonTimes.com, and of course, wherever podcasts are available. Tune in next time. And meanwhile, don't forget, stay blunt, stay bold.